teachers of Reddit, what are your stories of, oh god, this child is a sociopath? I have a million stories of students who say borderline sociopathic stuff, but the worst thing I've ever heard to date was, I can't be trusted with knives. My mommy hides all knives in the house from me, because I've tried to stab everything and everyone. I know if I stab an animal or a person too much they might die. This would mean I'd go to jail, and I don't think I could make it in jail. So I want to find a dead body and stab it over and over again. This way I know I won't get in too much trouble cause the person was already dead. Had a high school freshman who was a very boisterous kid and youthful for his age. One day he was being disruptive and acting up, so I asked him to step out of the room with me while my co-teacher continued the lesson. I calmly explained to him why I had taken him out, why his behavior was disruptive, and asked him to be more mindful in the future. He seemed attentive to me and to understand where I was coming from. Then, just as I was about to go back in with him, he says to me, "Okay, I'm gonna start crying so everyone thinks you yelled at me." I immediately put the brakes on. I asked him why he wanted to do that, why he felt it was okay to lie like that, and why he wanted to make me seem like a bad person when I had been very polite and thought we had had a good interaction. He didn't have any good answers with me, but we had already spent enough time out of class. I got him to agree to go in quietly, and we went on with the lesson. Needless to say, it was a sign of things to come. He turned out to be a gossiping, backstabbing little social monster. The more mature kids learned to keep their distance from him, and he cultivated friendships with other kids who enjoyed his acting out and emulated it. We finished out the year on reasonable terms, but as he went on to other teachers with different classroom styles, his behavior worsened and derailed many classes. A 5-year-old kindergarten student started crying. He didn't want to go in the classroom. His mother told him he had to go anyways. The kid stopped crying, took off his belt, and started whipping his mother. As a teacher, it was the first time I was completely speechless. This one happened just the other day, and, obviously, I'm going to be anonymous about it to protect the child's identity. Let's call her a B. So, I'm driving a minibus of students home from a basketball practice when suddenly a bee starts screaming, "Did that have peanuts in it? I'm allergic to peanuts." She begins hyperventilating and crying, and actually makes me pull over so she can get off the bus and throw up. We are about 15 minutes from the school, and I'm literally having a panic attack. So, I call the principal and ask what should I do. Do we have an EpiPen on hand at the school, ECT? She seems confused and puts a bee's grandmother on, who tells me she wasn't aware her granddaughter, who is claiming she can barely breathe, had any allergies. When we got back to the school I was about ready to faint and the principal brings out her registration paperwork to show me, no listed allergies. She isn't allergic to anything. It was all an act. The hyperventilating, the crying, even the throwing up, was all for attention. So I'm not entirely sure if this is sociopath or psychopath, but I had a child that was creepily into my pregnancy for the first 7 months. He wanted to name her, talk to my belly, etc. Then one day it clicked that I would leave, and he got really close to me and whispered, "When you come out, I'm going to kill you with a hammer. I hate you." I was shocked, so I took him with me to the office. The LSSP asked why he said that. He replied that it will take her away. I wanted to die, so she stays here. He was on a lot of medication for his incredibly violent tendencies. He had tried to kill his sister before by pushing her in front of a bus. His mother kept him locked in his room at night because she had found him standing over her with a knife. Edit. The child was a male 10 years old. His mother agreed to have him committed after he attempted to kill a police support dog using a pair of scissors. MHMR and CPS were both involved. I haven't seen or heard from the family since I left the district. Had a 6-year-old the size of a 9-year-old pin a 4-year-old to a wall and at least looked like he was trying to feel her up. I walked up behind him and shouted, "What the hell do you think you are doing?" And he immediately backed off and started stuttering trying to explain himself. He would say some fucked up shit too. One time, he walked up to me, a 6-foot tall, bearded man, and said, basically, "Hey mama, let me suck on them titties." Hated that kid. If you told him to do anything, He would intentionally do something to go against what he was told. His parents spoiled him rotten and let him do whatever he wanted. He got away with anything because a former teacher had inadvertently injured him, and his family, who are filthy rich, threatened to sue the dog shit out of the school. He basically had immunity from discipline at school and parents that let him do whatever he wanted. He hated me because I wouldn't put up with his shit. I never hurt him, but I would put him in a halt so that he couldn't move fairly often because he would constantly sucker punch other, smaller kids for just about any reason at all. Even if he just wanted the toy they were holding. Kid was a little sociopath with parents that were rich enough that they enabled the behavior. My dad is a lay pastor, and when I was a kid I would often have to accompany him on visits to other congregation members' homes. One time I was brought along, and the adults put me with the oldest daughter of the house to play until they were done. She was pretty nice, and immediately took me to her room to show me her pet hamster. When we got into the room, she closed the door behind us and put some pillows down in front of it so that it would be harder to get open. She told me it was because she hated her little brother. He would run in to scare her, or hit her, or worse. She then told me that this hamster was her second because her brother had ripped the legs off of her last one while she watched. I was maybe about 6, and I remember being fucking terrified. I worked with a student who would fit this description. The stories of the things he did are extensive. One example is that he got up from his seat to throw something away. On his way back, he walked up behind a student who was distracted working on his assignment. Out of the blue, he pushed the working student's head forward and into the desk. He gave him a bloody nose. There had been no previous altercation or source of friction between the two. His parents were divorced, and his mother was too afraid of him to have him during the days she had custody. His father would move him frequently from school to school once his behavior got so bad that the school started the process to get him into psychiatric care. I taught a 15-year-old boy who was really creepy. He submitted a creative writing story that was rape fiction in which he graphically described how a white blonde woman was being raped to corrupt the purity she feigns, which was quite scary as a white blonde woman to read. When confronted by a vice principal, he started ranting about how he hated all the girls in the class because they were all bitches, even though none listed had ever had an interaction with him, positive or negative. He then wrote me an apology letter where heaps of the lines were aggressively crossed out with drawn next to them. At last confrontation by a vice principal, he got really aggressive, walked out and punched the school fence several times. Unfortunately he wasn't expelled. I had a student while I was doing my student teaching, 8th grade. He was constantly in trouble, but during the times he was in class, he just stared off with the most vacant look in his eyes. It truly scared me. It was downright creepy. One day he was up at the whiteboard writing some stuff. I think it was correcting sentences with a bunch of other kids who were doing the same thing. I wasn't watching the kids at the board, and all of a sudden I hear this blood-curdling scream and look over. He had brought a hypodermic needle and had stabbed the girl next to him in the leg. He had been holding it in his hand the entire time, just waiting for the opportunity to stick someone. It was, of course, terrible, but the girl turned out okay. The worst part, besides that, was how he laughed when security came to get him. Ugh, I'm shuddering now just thinking about it. Not a teacher, but at my kid's daycare there was a bona fide sociopath in the making. This kid would inflict harm on others with a genuine smile on his face, like he was playing, but he was secretly enjoying it. Hitting, biting, punching, kicking, breaking toys, destroying artwork, but very secretive and carefully planned when teachers or parents weren't looking. He was really intelligent and well spoken for his age as well. Yeah, he was asked to leave after a few years and pretty much every parent there was relieved. I taught a 4-year-old boy who actually scared me because I fear what his future will be. I can see him ended up doing some awful things to people. He would try and kiss and hug girls, and when they didn't want to, he'd hold them tightly and try to anyway, even if they loudly protested. I explained that there is no kissing in school, and if someone doesn't want to hug, they absolutely do not have to. I also said that some people don't like hugging. He said, well, I want her to, so she will. He just couldn't understand boundaries of any kind. This is just one tiny example of the things he did. I did refer him as I believe he has autism and he's undergoing assessment now and awaiting a diagnosis, but I worry there's something else there with him. He would also watch other children to see how he should act. For example, a child might be sad and another child comforts them. He would copy this behavior, but totally exaggerate it, like completely over the top, and use it as an excuse to touch others, mainly girls. He never showed any emotion other than anger and jealousy. He had a very scary look in his eyes and I've never met another child like him. I was often substituting a special needs class, 6 to 7 boys about 8 to 10 years old. The days were normally lively, but I always had everything under control, and the boys had learned to trust me, and at least tried to do what I told them to. Never had any real problems, just normal stuff. Then one time there was a new boy in the class. Their teacher had written me a note that said to keep a close eye on him at all times. He had the telltale features of a fast child and small black eyes like a shark. He never showed any emotion whatsoever excluding immense excitement if someone else got hurt in any way. Few days passed without any incidents and then, out of the blue he stands up in the middle of class, yanks the much smaller guy sitting in front of him down with his chair from behind, and starts to pummel him in the face with his fists. I ran to intervene and grabbed him off and set him in a corner ordering one of the trustworthy boys to run and get the principal here. Now, the attacker stood in the corner, emotionless as ever and completely calm. I turned to check out the crying kid on the floor and miraculously he seemed unharmed, but was just shaken by the surprise attack. I sat down on the floor to calm him down and to help him up. Next thing I know is a shark-eye kid standing beside me and stabbing me on the leg with my teacher's scissors, the only pointy ones in the classroom. It was then when I realized why the attacked kid wasn't badly hurt. Shark-eye was big for his age, but he had no physical strength at all. I didn't even get a bruise from his stab. My trusty Lee's jeans stopped the blade which I instantly took from him. I threw the scissors on top of a high shelf and ordered everyone else out of the classroom to wait for the principal's arrival while I watched over Shark-eye. Boys ran out. Shark-eye looked at me curiously for a few seconds and sat down at his desk and continued his math assignments like nothing had happened. I asked him quite sternly what had made him attack a fellow student. Shark-eye lifted his empty gaze and said I heard him laughing at the school cafeteria. I thought he could have been laughing at me. Laurendole, can we play football today in PE class? The boy had no empathy nor remorse. The episode meant absolutely nothing to him. When the principal arrived we went through the situation and the class affirmed my description or events as they had happened. Shark-eye's mom picked him up early and he stayed at home for a few days. The principal told me that this was not the first such incident and that the boy was on cue for a hospital school class. The principal commended me for my actions. I was very young at the time and was surprised that I had been able to keep my cool even after getting stabbed, even if the attempt had been pitiful. Turned out that's my teacher's superpower. I never lose it. Even when I've been spit at, got chairs thrown at me, someone trying to gouge my eyes out while holding them, more than once, etc. Luckily the years in the same school have accumulated my reputation and nowadays it's very rare that someone even dares to try to mess with me. This incident was nearly 20 years ago, but I'll never forget it. Not a teacher, but I was in his class when it happened. This was in 7th grade, I think. The teacher asked everybody to turn in their homework and he asked for an extension because he was absolutely swamped for the last week. The teacher said no, and instead of just being okay with it, this kid picked up a chair and yeeted it across the classroom at the teacher. It hit her on the forehead, and she had to get stitches. Kid was expelled. Had a kid that was, it's, basically Charles Manson. Has been aggressive before. Stabbing kindergarteners with scissors, hitting, biting, scratching. 1st grade began new behaviors. He would convince other kids to eat crayons, or to go tell other kids to say hurtful things to others. This was also the year he became more controlling over girls. He would invite them to play, then if they didn't do what he said he would get the group to push the girl out. The result was the girls really wanted his attention. When the girls realized it wasn't worth it and began abandoning him, he became aggressive again. This year, 2nd grade, he has begun trying to find like-minded kids and create a gang of bullies. Of course the staff are trying our best to curtail the behaviors, but the parents are very litigious. Multiple school psychologists and social workers have recommended individual therapy in social minutes, but the parents insisted it wasn't needed. They said that we were lying about the behaviors and wanted their own social services person to come in for observation. So obviously the student was on his best behavior. He is not stupid by any means. He knew what was up. The parents then used those findings to stonewall us for 6 more months. I do not believe any child beyond saving. But there are kids that really cannot be saved by public schools. This kid needs more social/psych minutes, smaller classes, and more adult attention. We just don't have the money to provide that, especially when parents want to fight us every step tooth and nail. Met this kid when he was 2.5, and he was already messed up. Super manipulative. He would chase the other kids, trying to hit or kick them. He crafted pretty convincing lies to get other kids in trouble or blame them for things he did. He did it so well that it often was impossible to know it was a lie. Other than that, you knew it was him because it was always him. At nap time he would get off the cots and try to body slam all the kids trying to sleep. If you sat with him, he would try to kick you in the face. If you tried to control him by restraining him or something like that, he'd scream that you were hurting him, and my director would come in and threaten to write us up if we touched him again. Nap time was terrible. At 3 he continued the above behaviors, but started adding in creepy threats. He told my co-teacher he was going to get a gun online, and the postman was going to bring it to his house, and he would hide it in his backpack, and bring it to school, and shoot her in the head when she wasn't looking. He told another teacher he was going to bring a hammer, and hit her until her head looked like a plesiosaurus. At 4 he was still doing all the above creepy shit, but also was now big enough to throw chairs across the room, and had discovered gouging people's skin off with his fingernails and biting. He was not allowed to have anything even remotely sharp, ever. We pretty much had to be constantly watching him, despite having 19 other kids with 2 teachers. The ratio at 4 and up was 10 kids per teacher. During all of the above behaviors he would intersperse periods of being very sweet. As a teacher who wants the best for kids and believes they all deserve love and a place to feel safe, you'd think finally, he's opening up to me. We can work with this. We can help him. Even, selfishly, I'm the teacher who finally got to him, but that was only new teachers, and we all fell for it at least once. Inevitably it turned out he was using it to get away with things, and when you'd take another kid's side on something where he was clearly in the wrong he'd say, "But I thought you liked me now? I thought you liked me. You hate me, don't you? Nobody loves me," while crying. If you made it clear you didn't buy that, he'd pretty much just scream at you and then turn back into the terror he was. It was just an emotional fucking roller coaster with this kid, honestly. Always holding out hope eventually that little phase of being nice would be the real deal. The time it really reached him. By 5 he still wasn't potty trained. He refused, mostly, but when we pushed the matter his grandma got mad and told us never to put him in underwear. One day he showed up with stitches on his face. His grandma said he'd been bitten in the face by their dog and she was going to have it put down. We all immediately wondered what he'd done to the dog. For what it's worth, I convinced her to rehome the dog, and unless she was a manipulative lying little shit like her grandson, I like to believe she was telling the truth. We had real scissors in the pre-K room, and licensing says that all art materials had to be available at all times. This includes paint and chalk, which was a headache to manage all by itself. We had to watch him because he often tried to stab people. The director wouldn't listen to reason in regards to putting them up because of him. We were just supposed to do a better job controlling the classroom. He also had begun doing weird sexual things. He would drag smaller kids under the slide or under a table where we'd be less likely to see and try to rip their pants down and hump them. He tried to grab the little girl's crotches. He started talking about genitals and asking sexual questions. His grandma insisted we were teaching him this behavior and refused to answer any questions that intimated we thought it was probable that he was being sexually abused. She'd scream about us accusing his granddaddy, who she claimed was the only person home with him when she wasn't there, and how could we do something like that, and we were all perverts. I don't even remember all of it. We had all called CPS multiple times about this kid and had never seen any follow through. I had been refusing to work in the room with him anymore because I often had bruises and scratch marks and nothing was being done to support us. We were just supposed to redirect him. If we couldn't control him without saying no, or using timeout, or restraining him in any way, we got in trouble. We were only supposed to redirect, i.e. give him special treats, thereby further encouraging the behavior and making the other kids feel they had to replicate such behavior if they also wanted special toys, activities, food, whatever. My director was a complete shat. However, when he was about 5.5 we had gotten a new director who immediately decided he was a danger to the other kids and we couldn't control him with any tools we were authorized to use. She suggested he get some outside help and perhaps reduce his time with us until his behavior improved. His grandma withdrew him instead, screaming the whole time about how we always hated her and her baby and now he wasn't going to have anyone to watch him and he was gonna get worse because we abandoned him etc etc. I really hope that little boy got help. He was a danger from before most kids were forming full sentences and continued getting worse. I hope he got removed from the toxic environment he was in and got all the help he could get. However, I will not be surprised to see his name in the newspaper someday soon connected to a violent crime or two. He would be 11 or 12 by now. I have an ex who is a preschool teacher and he affectionately calls his students my little sociopaths, not to their faces or parents, because that age is just, empathy is a learned skill, let's put it that way. I had honestly never thought about it, but he taught me that things like hitting is bad because it hurts people, and hurting people is not a good thing is something that kids have to be taught. Edit for an attempt at clarity that while kids have a huge range of emotions that we sometimes forget about because they can't use their words for them the way adults do, the behaviors one uses to demonstrate concepts like caring for others are a skill of sorts to be demonstrated, taught, and practiced, and it's much harder to get them to understand it when they are older than, like, 4 or 5. I think he said 3 is really when they start to get it, but often parents are still treating 3-year-olds like babies. My mom was a teacher for several decades, and she taught some real winners too. There's a kid a few years younger than me that she had, and she never explicitly said anything bad about him, because he was the son of one of her friends, and lives in their neighborhood. But that kid was straight from a fucking horror movie. He's adopted and one of the first things he did after his parents brought him home was to shut the family dog in the refrigerator. One time he sneaked up to my parents' house in the middle of the night. We live in the middle of nowhere, so this is terrifying in and of itself, and tried to break into our house. My parents usually left the doors unlocked at night and I would go around after they went to bed and lock them. When that didn't work, he cut the electrical wiring to our outside lights, so it was pitch black outside and we couldn't see anything, and then slashed the tires on my car and tried to break the windows. He used to just beat the shit out of other kids, especially younger ones, whenever the mood struck him. That fucker is like 30 now, and he's still a total piece of shit. Like, he still lives with his mom and he's gotten her house swatted at least 5 times, because he deliberately goes online into spaces where that's a thing and antagonizes people, then takes off to leave her to deal with the fallout. I'm hoping to be an adoptive parent myself one day and sometimes I have nightmares about this kid, because as far as I know, his parents really did try super hard to help but it just never worked. Not a teacher, but was a camp counselor. He was 12 to 14, talked a lot about parodies on YouTube that talked about killing people. He was talking to me about a Frozen parody of Do You Want to Build a Snowman, but something along the lines of Do You Want to See a Dead Body or something. He mostly talked to me and not the other children as he kept to himself. I told him we weren't going to talk about that stuff at camp. He also had a little brother, 6yo, I had in my camp group once, more of a little shit, swore a lot and threatened the other kids a lot too. He also thought he was more mature than the other kids. Like when another camper his age asked a question a 6yo would generally ask, he would respond with "for fuck's sakes," and rolled his eyes. What I understood, parents weren't in the picture and were being raised by grandma and grandpa. Met them a few times briefly on pickup, and they seemed like generally nice grandparents. For more funny Askreddit stories, please subscribe and like the video.